Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which is titled Creating a Culture of Safety, the Role of Leaders in Promoting Psychological Safety and Mitigating Psychosocial Hazards. I'm delighted to be hosting this event today. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sharon Knighton, and I am a co-founder and managing director of People Mode. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we stand today and to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I'm in Brisbane, and the First Nations people here are the Turrbal people from the north side of the river and the Jagera peoples from the south side of the river. I would like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. So before I introduce our special guest speaker, Alex, I thought it would be important to perhaps take a minute and remind ourselves about some of the definitions of some of the terms that we'll be using today. I'm sure you're all aware, having read probably and seen quite a lot, but I think it's always good to remind ourselves. So firstly, when we talk about psychosocial hazards, these are the factors in the design or management of work or any harmful workplace behaviours. So psychosocial hazards can cause physical and psychological harm to workers. As we know, in Australia, there is a Work Health and Safety Code of Conduct that has recently been implemented. And this code addresses workplace interactions and behaviours. So it's very much focused on the psychosocial hazards, as previously mentioned. So just to clarify that some of the common ones are, high or low job demands, lack of control, lack of job control or autonomy, poor support in the workplace, a lack of role clarity, poor organisational change management, a lack of reward and recognition, bad workplace relationships, remote or isolated work, traumatic events that might occur in the workplace, violence and aggression, and all types of bullying and harassment, including sexual harassment. We know that these hazards can cause psychological and physical harm, which include anxiety, depression, burnout, PTSD, sleep disorders, and even in extreme cases, sadly, death by suicide. So who is responsible for identifying and mitigating these risks? Well, according to the Work Health and Safety website and all of their material, it's all officers in an organisation, such as company directors, board members, senior managers and executives. They have an immediate and positive and proactive duty to exercise due diligence to ensure the organisation complies with the Work Health and Safety Act and regulation. And unfortunately, failure to comply could result in really tough financial penalties and jail sentences for individuals and for the organisation as well. So hence, at the moment, we're having a lot of conversations with some nervous board members at the moment, as well as CEOs and heads of all kinds of departments. They're aware that this has sort of come into, it was implemented on the 1st of April here in Queensland, but it has been in practice in most states for the last few months. Just to clarify, psychological safety, whilst slightly different to psychosocial hazards, it definitely falls under the banner, and we'll be talking about this a lot more when I do introduce Alex. But just to clarify that psychological safety is the belief that no one will be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns or mistakes. And whilst it's experienced by the individual or felt by the individual, it's experienced in team environments. It is slightly different to psychosocial hazards, I believe that it would be near impossible to address that issue of psychosocial hazards without having a culture of psychological safety and allowing people to be able to speak up about what is happening to them or in their team without fear of any punishment. So now that we've gone through all of that, and sorry if I've overloaded you, but I'm delighted to welcome and introduce Alex Glassy, who is joining us all the way from Vancouver Island in Canada. Alex is the co-founder and chief innovation officer of Conductor Software. He also is a circular CEO, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. He's an author, a speaker, and a facilitator. And I've had the pleasure of working with Alex. Alex, welcome to our webinar today. We've been having a chat before we actually joined, and it's probably ironically warmer there than it is in most parts of our country here at the moment.
Yeah, I think we have like 2 weeks where we're we get a little bit warmer than Brizzy. But listen, thanks for inviting me here. Thanks to everybody who's on the call. Some friends I know and some people I haven't yet met. So I'm looking forward to getting the conversation revved up and rolling. I also have to say, and this is very tongue-in-cheek, and I'm trusting that my audience can handle a joke like this. I am totally happy to be living in Canada where we can treat our employees just the way we like. I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. Australia is leading, I think, the world in some of the research and then some of the regulatory pieces that are coming down the pike. Canada is hot on its heels in many respects. And so this is why 4 or 5 years ago, when I was down in Australia doing some research on this topic, I've met tons and tons of Australians, and we've spent the last 4 or 5 years really working this topic, psychological safety and the impact on people. So totally happy to be here. It's a bit of a chilling public service announcement that you started off with, Sharon. I've never been in a webinar before where, it's like the fear of prosecution and jail and
and this is not about fear mongering at all. And one of the things that I love talking about when I talk about psychological safety is that, yes, this is something that, there is legislation now and it is serious and it needs to be taken seriously. But I also believe what it's done is opened up so much opportunity now to have discussions about how you can take this and actually use this to create a workforce that is, collaborative, innovative. They're not afraid to share ideas. They're not afraid to speak up. So there is definitely opportunity here. And that's why I do like to focus on that. I think it's important to get the legislation out of the way, but to be aware of that, you do need to be compliant. However, as I mentioned before, this is also a great opportunity for organizations. So on that topic, I just wanted to say, firstly, I'd love to talk about, the Conductor software and what sets it apart, because that's how I met you. I've been talking about psychological safety for many years now. It's a great topic and I love it. And we met through this because I was looking for a tool that could be used in a workplace that would clearly, survey and give great results, but results that could be actioned. So if you could please tell us what actually sets Conductor apart.
Well, great. And before I get there, because I'm happy to answer those questions, but before I get there, I'm wondering if, just to set the tone for what we want to cover off, I'm wondering if everyone could just use their chat, and if you have something that's on your mind, like why are you here? What issue or concern do you have related to psychosocial hazards that you'd like us to touch on or brush up against? And so I can see people.
Great idea.
People starting to chat. Yeah. I just want to make sure that we can. And did Amy make her way in? I see there's a note there. Did Amy find her way in? Oh, there we go.
She hasn't yet. I posted her oh, here she is. Sorry.
Okay, there she is. Yeah, great. Fantastic. All right. So does anyone put in their particular concerns, or do you want to mute your mic? I'm not seeing it in the chat. Where are people typing? Here we go.
No one has any concerns.
There we go. So Steve, just general information so I can have somewhat intelligent conversations if I'm asked. Fantastic. You're in the right place, Steve. Murray Galbraith, how can we measure it? Measuring psychosocial hazards, we'll be able to do that. Lou, open to learn more on this topic, great. So does anyone have anything specific? Anything real, wow, I'm really concerned about how it applies to this, or, okay, if you do, just pop it in there, and how this ties in with well-being conversation. Kathy, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's where's Kathy? There she is. Okay, Kathy, I'm waving to you. Yeah, that's a great topic. In fact, I'd like to start off there, if you don't mind, and then I know Sharon's got a question on the table I'd like to get to, but I find that psychosocial hazards, and starting off a webinar with the threat of fines and incarceration, but psychosocial hazards, it's just a funny term. And it's funny that we need to have a government to remind us that this is not good stuff in an organization. And it just turns out that over the course of the last 125 years or so, we have really squeezed the humanness out of our organizations in pursuit of productivity and performance and everything else. But the great irony is that in the last 125 years, our workplaces have changed dramatically. We no longer hire people for their muscles. We now hire them for their minds. And human minds absolutely are social instruments, social creatures. Human beings absolutely need to have a social environment. In fact, we thrive in a social environment. So it's very interesting to see this, business squeezing out the humanness, and now, but it's come back with a vengeance. And that leads into Kathy's point as well, is that we certainly will talk about the hazards, but really what we're here to talk about is how can we help our people in the organizations thrive? Because if the people in the organizations thrive, it's when our organizations really flourish. And to me, that's the way I'd like to end up thinking about this today. You okay with that, Sharon?
Absolutely. As I said, I bring up the risks and the threats at the very beginning so that people are aware, but this conversation is all about the positiveness of creating, a positive, psychologically safe environment.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that starts off, to answer your question, Sharon, the difference between kind of the stuff that Conductor does and other, and I don't want to, really compare ourselves with other surveys, because they're there to do different things. The engagement surveys, for example, they've been around since 1995 or so with the Q12, Gallup's Q12, but it's designed to measure, people's enthusiasm for their workplace. It's and because it's 30 or 32 years old, it doesn't have the benefit really of some of the latest in research, neuroscience-based research that really understands that how we feel very specifically, this sense of, as you said, my sense of comfort in a social setting, in my team, in the workplace, when I'm sitting with my immediate supervisor, that those things, more than engagement, actually drive how I'm going to behave in the workplace. And my behavior in the workplace can be measured in a number of different ways through sales performance or customer satisfaction or that type of thing. So that's what we do, is we measure psychological safety at the heart of it. And then it as you pointed out, it and psychosocial hazards are basically parallel constructs. They're so overlapped. It's very tough to tease them apart. Does that help to answer that?
Oh, absolutely. And, one of the things that I do also really love about Conductor is it's based on David Rock's SCARF model, or you use the CARES model, which is slightly different. But the 5 social drivers that we know all humans require, which is significance, uncertainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness or equality. And all of the questions in the survey all fall in under one of those categories. So it is about measuring how people are feeling, how confident or comfortable people are feeling in all of those realms. And also what I loved is the fact that, you know, you get an individual scorecard for the team leader that will actually show what is it happening in the team. And it's not about pointing blame or saying, you know, you're doing this completely wrong. It's about saying, this is what we've been able to identify, the areas that you require support in. And that's what we're here to do, is to support you, because we know that in a lot of organizations, traditionally, leaders have been promoted based on technical skills and abilities, and not necessarily given a lot of training or support around their people management skills, which is, as we know, a very different kind of set of skills. So, you know, it is, again, not about pointing the finger or telling anyone they're wrong, but about supporting them and strengthening those skills.
Yeah, why don't we get back to the psychosocial hazards and then move forward from there, because I think we need to just check that off. So there's a couple of things that we need to be able to do when we've got when we're thinking about psychosocial hazards. The government is telling us is that we have to be able to measure it, and then we have to be able to address it. And so that's what I wanted to start off right now. Is I'll show you just a few slides that show how we can measure psychosocial hazards in your organization. And I won't spend a lot of time at it, but I want to tell you a couple of stories and show you a couple of stories, how we can really get down into the nitty gritty, into the weeds if we need to find some of this stuff. And then how we then address it. And then I'll end up with taking us that one step forward, which is, okay, now that we've got those check boxes, you know, taken care of, what we really want to do is to use these things to help our people thrive and our organizations flourish. So, and I want to make sure that you're all kind of geared up and ready to type and ready to talk, because I've got a couple of interactive things coming up. So I hope you're ready for it. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. I'll share my screen in just a sec. If I remember how to do that. You should be able to see a picture of a mountain in the background. Everyone can see that? Okay, so this is is everyone, who's been to Vancouver Island? Because if you've been to Vancouver Island, you might have gone to Tofino. And if you go to Tofino, you're going to drive right by Sprout Lake. And that's Sprout Lake. So that's where my partner Jackie and I live. And the snow is now off that particular mountain. We're very happy to hear. All right, so you should be able to see our title slide here. Thumbs up, Sharon. Yeah, you can. Everyone can see. Yeah, great. Thanks. And am I pronouncing your name properly? Is it Kinetti? Yeah. All right. Okay. I got 2 thumbs up. Love it. So great. So here's the diagnostic. Take 30 seconds and just go through that. Okay.
One of the things I do love, Alex, is the fact that it does only take, you know, less than 4 minutes to complete this survey, because I've heard of some people doing surveys that take 20 minutes or more. And I'm like, oh, really?
Yeah, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Yeah, terrible. No, we designed this thing. It's been around for quite a while. We designed it to be short, fast, simple, and really responsive. And we use it all over the world. It's an amazing tool. So 25 questions on any device. And then what do you do with it? Well, what you can do with it is, I mean, there's all kinds of charts and everything else, but really simply, the easiest one is just to do a heat map. And here you see the 25 questions across the top. And you'll notice that each question starts with the letter CARES, CARES, which is, Sharon mentioned, is very analogous to David Rock, another fabulous Australian, his SCARF model. So relatedness, equity, whereas certainty, significance, and whatever the last letter is, autonomy. And what we've done here is we've just simply, we've sorted them with the highest scores out of 100. It's all out of 100 on the right side, and then some of the lower scores on this side. And you can immediately visually see, wow, we're doing some good stuff, and we got some other stuff that we need to dig into a little bit more. So let's go down one other level. And so what we can now do is we can group. and we can group by, in this case, it's region, but we can group by role, gender, age, tenure, anything that you wanted to track in your organization. But just so you can see, how this works, all of a sudden my average score, it's now that I've got better and higher and lower scores, and I can start to see where, we're doing a great job across the organization. As you look down these columns, some of these columns on the other side here, we're a little more challenging. And so I want to take a look at that. And then of course I've got a team, head office, got an average score of 82, and then it drops down a little bit. South America is doing a little bit not so well. So let's dig down in another couple of ways. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time slicing and dicing, but I did want to show you something. This is live data from a group that I'm working with right now. And grouping and filtering lets us pinpoint at-risk groups, but not only find kind of where the risk is, but also to understand kind of what the risk might be. And you can see here, I'm looking at tenure. So people who have been hired for less than a year compared with people who have been in the organization for about 1 to 2 years. And what we're trying to do here is we're really trying to understand retention. What, in this particular case, what's driving a higher than normal turnover rate, staff turnover rate amongst new hires. And you can see that R3, for example, there's a 27-point difference between when they start, the group that's, just started, and the group that's a year or two into it. And R3 says, I feel it is okay to make a mistake in my team. That's the question. And when you answer the question, never, sometimes, never, rarely, sometimes, often, always. And so this here is saying it's become much less okay to make a mistake in my team. As I've come into the organization for my first year, I'm full of enthusiasm and gung-ho and then a year or two later, I don't want to make mistakes in my team. And what does that do? Well, we'll talk about that in greater detail when we get into the live session. Here's another question. E2, work is allocated fairly in my team. Again, it's dropped 13 points. And this sense of fairness, again, David Rock uses the F word, fairness, and we use E for equity. The sense of fairness, back when you were a kid and your parent came out to you with a cookie and broke it in half and gave you what you thought was the smaller half of the cookie, and your sibling or your friend got the bigger half, and you would scream bloody murder. And guess what? Adults are just grown-up kids, and we still have that sense of fairness, except this time it's not really over cookies. It's about how work is allocated or other things in the workplace. And so what we know is that when we see falling E2, when we do several surveys, and we see E2 is falling amongst a particular group, that is a very strong indicator that those people are at risk for leaving the organization. All right, this is a big splash of color. And what we've done here is we're grouping by team leader. And because team leaders are responsible for impact up to 70% of a person's sense of psychological safety in the team. Our immediate supervisor has so much control over our work-a-day life, and that's reflected here in these scores. Again, you can see some teams doing very, very well at the top here, some teams not doing very well at all. And this variance between the teams, right, from 86 down to 66, this variance between the teams suggests that team leaders haven't received the resources they need to effectively support their people's psychosocial health. This is a really interesting indicator. And then we have other analysis that allows us to see the variance within a team. And we have wide variance within a team, as many of these teams have. That's also another indicator. But now for us, we can now tell where the risk is. We can tell how much risk there is, and we have clues that help us to solve these things. And that's awesome. All right. So that's what we're doing there. Now you're ready to get interactive. Everyone's nodding their head. Fabulous. Okay, here we go. Get your fingers keyed up, or I mean, I'm happy to have you guys drop your mics. There's not a lot of us here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move in from the diagnostic into support. And we're actually going to solve two problems that we saw in the previous chart. But just like the invention of the X-ray in 1895, once you know what the issue is and where it is, you can more easily address it. By the way, little known fact, the X-ray technology was developed in 1895, and it was the fastest release of any technology on the planet up to that time. By 1896, a year later, it was standard operating procedure in many hospitals around the world, because up to that point, if you had a broken finger or broken arm, there's no way to see what's going on inside. And so the doc's got to, wiggle it around, and not a very pleasant experience. All right, so let's go back to that heat map and let's zoom in on just one team, because this is a lot of information and we're not going to solve everything here by ourselves. What we want to do is let's get down to one team, and then let's get down to one particular question. Let's go back to that question R3. I sometimes, a score of 54 is, people are saying we sometimes feel it is okay to make a mistake in my team, but there's lots of times when I don't feel comfortable. Now, I'm going to show one other piece here. What we've done for this team leader is we've taken these 25 scores and we've just simply wrapped them around this circle and shown them with the black dots how they compare. So the closer to the center are lower scores, closer to the edge are higher scores. And I won't go into this right now, but then we've divided these into 4 key topics that most managers, most supervisors are thinking about. I gotta tell my team the direction, what we're going to do. I got to tell my team, I got to check up and follow up with them to make sure that they're being held accountable. But I also have to support the individuals and then make sure that the team dynamics are in place. And we'll come back to this in just a minute. But for us right now, what I want to do is just have you start to tell us, why is this a low score here a problem? And I can't see your I can't see, unfortunately, the I don't think I can. Let me just see. If I do this, yeah, there we go. Now I should be able to see the comments, or maybe Sharon, you can read them out, or Cherry, you can read them out. Why is this a problem? I'll go back to here.
Come on, everyone, don't be shy.
Come on, rattle it in there.
Are you asking what's the cause, or are you asking why it's a problem?
Yeah, I'm asking why is this question a problem if it's low? I've got a team, and the team is saying, I feel it's not okay to make a mistake in my team. Why is that a problem?
So I'll speak. It's Jeff. Hi, Alex. It's Sharon.
Hey, Jeff. Good to see you.
Hi, Jeff.
I'll just take the context of learning. If you want your team to develop skills, capabilities, come up with anything new, inevitably that involves a little bit of trial and error. So there's going to be massive discouragement for any sort of evolution, development, innovation, learning, or change. It's the sort of thing that can create a stagnating environment. You're not prepared to do new things because you're likely to make a mistake and you fear you'll get penalized for it.
Absolutely right.
It's going to cause resistance to change as well.
Yeah, good for you, Jeff. Thank you.
And from MA, people are less inclined to take risks, therefore potentially stopping progress or innovation. Kathy has mentioned very similarly that, hiding mistakes and blaming others, no innovation and sharing of information. So it's hard to solve problems that, we're being faced with new problems every single day, and technology and everything's moving so quickly. If people are not game to speak up in a team and suggest new ways of working or thinking, then there's not going to be any innovation.
Absolutely right. You're all absolutely right. And back to the definition of psychological safety, and I'll simplify it even further. It is the ability in a room to speak up or speak out. And if I'm fearful of speaking up for anything, a new idea, just adding to the conversation, if I feel that I'm going to get to any kind of embarrassment or humiliation or pushback or anything like that, I'm just going to get into the habit of sitting on my hands. And when that happens, if someone's sitting on their hands, psychological safety is contagious, and other people will notice it and they will start to sit on their hands. And so now what you've got is a traditional, old style meeting where someone's at the head of the table and they're doing all the talking and everyone else is just sitting there listening. And that is, we've just disengaged all of those brains. We're just not using those brains whatsoever. Great. Any other comments that are in there, Sharon? Or can we go on to the next question?
I think, so fear can lead to a blaming culture.
Yeah.
Hesitation to try and innovate. So so people understand why this is such an important thing for people to be able to feel safe. And sadly, it's a common thing that when I talk to people in organizations where they say, well, no one listens to me, is a common response. I tried to give my feedback once and I was ignored. I'm not doing that again, because we know that when that happens, it doesn't take many times for people to put forward an opinion to have it shot down without giving a valid reason. And they won't speak out again. They will just sit back, as you say, disengage and say, well, look, I tried and now I'm just here for the paycheck. And it's very common, sadly.
Yeah. And when other people in the room see you being embarrassed or humiliated or something like that, they don't need to have that experience themselves. They're like, okay, I can see what kind of room this is. I'm just going to be quiet. Well, good. That's a lot of great responses there. We've all experienced this. We know that's the thing about psych safety, is that it's obvious. We all know these things. We've just simply put them into a 25 question survey. Let's skip over the second one, because I think we've talked about that already. What might a team leader do to improve this? What might a team leader do to improve this? And I just want to see that chat, the number of chats in there go just rocketing up. Here we go.
Yep. So from Steve, we've got listen. So I am, again, creating a culture where people do feel that they can speak out. And it's not about having every idea be implemented, because we know that doesn't work, but being able to speak up. Kathy said in praise contribution. Lou's said be approachable. Deanne, speak positively about mistakes as learning opportunities. Great. Talk through what learning is. Yep. And Steve, be last to speak. So I think that's a key thing too for leaders. It's very common as a leader to think that we have to speak first, that we've got to set the way. But what we can do in that instance is create this belief in people that they have to then agree with everything we say, particularly if they're not feeling psychologically safe. And they just, and this is where confirmation bias happens. And we just get this echo chamber of everyone saying the same thing because they think that's what they need to do.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And let's own your own mistakes as a leader. Let's make mistakes and let's own up to them and, apologize for them and all the rest of that stuff. Be human as a leader. Something else, if you're in a room and you're trying to come up with new ideas, sometimes make ridiculous ideas, like over exaggerate or kind of come up with some kind of comic idea that is not going to work, right? But it gets people kind of relaxed and laughing and into the game. And all of a sudden you start to have other people venturing into the laughter and the joke and coming up with their own ideas and knowing that, hey, if it doesn't go, it's okay. It's absolutely okay. And so normalize to the extent that you can with humor and praise and listening and approachability and being last, all the things that we just said. If you can remember that as a leader and practice it, because it takes practice to do this stuff, then people will, I think people will fear those mistakes less. I also think that, by the way, there are some, when I work with engineering firms, for example, and particularly engineering firms, they know that they can't make mistakes. I'm working with a company right now, and if they make mistakes, people die. I work with a nuclear power plant a couple of years back, and they just absolutely, this R3 was the lowest score I've ever seen in a group. And so what we had to do is we had to talk to the leaders about splitting apart the sense of making a mistake that's going to kill someone and making a mistake in a social setting. Like, as we're talking through these ideas, we really want to be able to put forward ideas, and knowing that they may be right or wrong, but knowing that it is in that discussion that good things happen, where problem solving happens, right? So to tease these things apart, and the psychological safety research will tell us that the more teams will talk about mistakes, the higher their performance is, the less actually mistakes that they'll make, their release into the world. So that's great. Anybody, I mean, that's fantastic. You're a great crowd. We're gonna do one more of these, but does anyone have any last comments on this one before we move on about this question?
I think, again, it's vulnerabilities come up quite a bit, and I think it's one thing that as leaders can be really challenging, because it's definitely a new way of thinking. Being vulnerable, being able to show that you're human and that you'll make mistakes as well, because we've definitely not, that's a very recent thing, because in the past, as a leader, you had to be the shining example of never being wrong.
Yeah, absolutely right. And yeah, that's an impossible task for any leader, to never be wrong. All right, let's keep going. So what I've done is I've just jumped down to another team here, and I'm going to pick on E2 right there. Work is, now this is an even lower score, 40. Work is rarely to sometimes allocated fairly in my team. And you can see that when you see a low score like this, it's very seldom that a low score is the only low score on a particular team, something like this. And so when you take a look at this particular team, you know that that leader needs lots of support, and this team needs lots of support in order to get past this. And so again, this leader would get their team support card, and then we would help them to understand what E2 means, why it's important, and then what they can do. But again, it's fairly straightforward. So I'll put it to the team. Team, why is a low E2 a problem in a team? They're rolling in. Come on, I expect to have 5 or 10 comments in there. Let's go, team.
Yeah. Lack of accountability, lack of trust, people feeling overworked, demotivating.
Yeah.
I would say you've got people in there, disengagement, not feeling recognized. You'd have people in there at risk of burnout.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, it's something that I hear a lot in organizations, where they feel like they're the one that ends up carrying the workload for a lot of other people.
Yeah.
To teamwork, collectively deliver on objectives, flogging the willing horse.
Yeah. Who become unwilling.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone,
feeling of why bother? Why am I'm the one that has to clean up all of this mess. Again, disengagement.
Yeah. Trust is I think one of the first or second things that someone typed in, and if anyone who plays Wordle, it's a 5-letter word. One of my favorite Wordle words is trust, and it actually, the absence of trust, if I do not feel that the leader is just trust me to do my work, or which is really what this is saying, is that there's an unfairness to this thing, the team crumbles. It falls apart. And so all those things that you've just said come to bear. So we don't need to flog that unwilling horse. What about the last question? What could a team leader do to improve this. And this team leader's got there's a long road back, but it's possible. What can a team leader do to support this allocation of work in the team? What do we got?
So Deanne suggested work to better understand individual workload and capacity.
Yep, absolutely right.
Get to know the team members. What are their motivations, desires, capabilities from MA? Yep. Understand individual motivations. Ask and check in around capacity and capability. So again, about having open conversations with your team members. Discuss individual and group needs and what can be job crafted, strengths profiling tool for whole team to best allocate work.
Yeah, absolutely. Transparency is another one. If you're going to allocate, so you're going to, there's a job, here it comes, and I'm going to give it to Pat, for example. Why did I give it to Pat? Be transparent about this, or put it to the team. Hey, we got this particular task. How do we want to best manage this? Put it to the team and let the team start to step forward. And right, which goes back to the last question, this sense of being able to contribute in a group setting. There are all kinds of ways to do this, but they have to be done deliberately and consistently. Right? Trust is a very fragile thing. And we need to be consistent as leaders to make sure that we're not fair, and then unfair, and then fair, and then unfair. There was an article in the New York Times 2 or 3 days ago that's saying the worst kind of relationships are not those where you're perfectly trustworthy or perfectly untrustworthy. It's those relationships where you're not sure, and so you're constantly whipsawed. And so this consistency of doing this stuff is really important. Wow. I see the time. I'd love to sit here and we'll talk about it. Can I move on, Sharon?
Yes, please. Yes. I know this is always the issue with these kind of things. So there's never enough time. But we've talked about the conductor tool, which I love, as I mentioned. And one of the benefits of psychological safety, apart from being compliant, as we previously mentioned, is that you're more likely to have the high performing and collaborative team. Have you seen proof of this in workplaces where you've engaged this tool and done work, Alex? Have you been able to show measurable proof?
Yeah, let me just skip forward. So you're one slide ahead of me. So let me just skip forward. So this slide here just shows that we can take that particular leadership model and we can support the leaders all the way through it with coursework and things like that. So this is an opportunity for us to be very deliberate in assessing, measuring and assessing psychosocial hazards, but then being very deliberate and practical at resolving it. And what we can do then is, I'm just going to skip right past this. What we can see is that psychological safety is strongly correlated with workplace behaviors. And we use this model here, where we have team psychological safety, as you've seen already. We know that team leaders are impacting up to 70% of team psychological safety. If anyone here is interested in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've just done a major piece of work in London, in England, and we've done this over and over again. But that piece of work showing that DEI and team psych safety are correlating to 76%. In other words, they're basically, again, like psychosocial hazards, they're overlapping constructs. You cannot do something on DEI without having it affect psych safety and vice versa. It also impacts, in this particular group, it impacts retention to about 35%. So they've got a multi-million-dollar retention problem, and they believe now that we're predicting that they can save £2 or £3 million in their retention re-onboarding costs. And then, of course, other performance, including sales, customer satisfaction. Is it any surprise that if your staff feels psychologically safe, that gets transmitted to any customer interactions, customer satisfaction? So yeah, all this stuff we see, that's what we do. It's we see it over and over again.
Mm. Yeah, and I think, you know, being able to provide measurable results, and I know we've talked about in the past where you've been able to show an increase in psychological safety in a sales team, for example, means that their sales results also go up, because just simply the fact that the way that they're responding or conducting their business with clients increases because of the way that they're actually feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, back to my earlier comment, it's surprising that we need governments or tools like this to actually tell us what we intuitively know. If we look after our staff, they're going to look after our customers. And that's what that 42% here, that is from that retail, one of the retail pieces of work we did, where psychological safety was predicting 42% of their revenue. So if you can imagine, that's a staggering number. All right.
Absolutely. And I know we're sort of getting towards the end of the webinar now, and I'd really like to leave some time at the end for any questions or any discussion from the participants. But I guess, let's just, I really do want to revisit the how I opened at the beginning. What are the risks of organisations not addressing psychological safety in their workplace? What do organisations need to be thinking about, going forward, about whether they're interested in actually looking at this for their organisation?
Well, I think we all have to. I mean, does anyone here, just by show of hands, I can see some people's cameras are on, but for those who have got their cameras on, by show of hands, how many of you are concerned about the psychosocial hazards legislation that's out there? Show of hands. No one's concerned about it. Awesome. Oh, we got one. Okay, Neil's concerned about it. And then how many of you are concerned because you are not concerned, but you're interested in creating to changing the leadership style or the culture of the organization because you've got concerns about underperformance or turnover or that type of thing. So I got Kathy, okay, so that's where we're here. So you didn't need the government to come along and tell you, hey, look after your people better. You don't need anyone to say that. What you're going is, okay, we know that we've come out of a rough time with COVID, and those effects are still with us. And it's been a real reminder to us that we have humans that are in the workforce, and now we're trying to figure out how to best to do it. Great, then you're in the right place, and I'm glad I was able to show you a little bit more than just eliminating risks. This work that we do is very much about unlocking all of that pent-up potential that's in all those little nooks and crannies, and quite frankly is unlocked by the immediate supervisors. If we can help them to deal with R3 and R1 and E2 and E4 in a slightly better way, our people will step up. They will lean into that. Any questions or comments from the gallery? Again, feel free to unmute yourself and pop in if you'd like to. I'll just see. I think it looks like there's a.
Okay, so from Neil, Alex, I would be interested if you are seeing intergenerational differences in responses to perceived psych safety.
Absolutely. In fact, my work in London is all about that. They got a revolving door amongst younger people coming into the organization, and they stay for 1, 2, 3 years, and then they leave. And a big part of the reason is that I just saw a Don. What's the guy's name? Mad Men, Sharon?
Don Draper.
Don Draper. I just saw what's one of his proteges, the female protege comes in and
Peggy.
says, Peggy comes in, and Don says, you're always looking glum, and she goes, you know what? I do great work, for you. And he goes, yeah, and I pay you a lot of money to do that. And she goes, yeah, but you never thank me. And he goes, well, that's what the money's for. And it's
not a lot of psychological safety back in the 60s, I didn't think, but yes.
Sometimes when you go back and look at those things and you go, we used to, I'm old enough to know, that's how I started in those types of cultures. that was leadership at the time. And the 20s and the sub 30s, sub 39, this is we were looking at in England, the sub 39s just aren't going to put up with it. They're just not.
The millennials are, and we've talked about this, and I know it's also a conversation I've had out there with a lot of leaders, that millennials are really intolerant of, if they're not receiving, regular feedback and acknowledgement and feeling significant, then they will leave that role and they'll go and work in the gig economy somewhere. They're not locked into having this full-time job. And I know that we've spoken about one of the organizations that you're working with, and they refer to this as the hollowing out. So you've got, your senior leadership team that are in place, and then you're bringing new people, often, millennials, into the workplace, and they're often leaving even halfway through the onboarding process because they're saying, what, no, this isn't for me. I'm not feeling good about this. I don't get any recognition, and they're leaving. So they're not getting people actually moving into the organization. So they're referring to it as a hollowing out. So, and we know, that's a very large organization that you're doing that work with, but it wouldn't be, certainly wouldn't be a standalone organization. We know that this is actually occurring, and it's speeding up, and whether it's speeding up because of COVID or because of the generational change, it's going to be a massive issue for most organizations in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and quite frankly, some of the things that I hear, and again, I don't blame any leader when I hear this, because it's just the way that they grew up. It's the world in which they grew up. But you'll talk about these, sub 29s or sub 30s, the 20 to 29s or the 30 to 39s, or right, and they'll say, oh, those spoiled kids, like it's like what they all they need. And it's just like, no, you grew up in a world where it was an anti-humane, is an anti-humanistic workplace. What they're just saying is like, yeah, be human, be real. And part of what we do is we say please and thank you and job well done. And that's really the difference that they're looking for, rather than here's your paycheck and that's how I thank you, this Don Draper line. That's a great question, Neil. Thanks. Any other questions?
Probably more of a comment, Alex, than anything else. What a great tool. I think it's really helpful. I think one of the things that we're sort of struggling in the Pacifica community is merging the two together. We got quite a big labor hire force that's coming over soon. In terms of psychological safety, I think it's the preparation on how we interact with Western frameworks too, which is I'm wondering if you've done any work around the the work with, it's a lot of the Pacifica community are looked at as being lazy, and that when it's actually the respect part, they don't come out and they don't speak up, they don't say a lot of things, but they're actually really quite smart. So I'm interested to know if you've got any sort of culturally responsive sort of tools that we could use as well, or if I could play in Vancouver, if you can send me over, that'd be great.
Yeah. Listen, Kennedy, that is an unbelievable question, because Sharon and I are doing work with a large organization, and we're doing work in their Fiji office. And so the work that I do, I just want to let you know that the work that I do is very much influenced by, like, my the course that we run is called circular leadership, as opposed to linear leadership, the top-down command and control. And the work that I do is very much influenced by restorative justice practices and the whole indigenous, some of the indigenous themes in Canada. And they almost map very closely to Vanua, the concept of Vanua, right? And in fact, when we were doing that work, I brought over a stone from Vancouver Island, one of the beaches there, and we did a circle ceremony. We started off with a circle ceremony as we were finishing off work that Sharon and I were doing with a group of 14 or 15 leaders there. I would be honored to talk to you more about this work, as it speaks right here to my heart, man. You've got me. So thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry to just add this bit too. I think that the part that we're really struggling with is the boundary lines, because I think relationship building's easy for us, but I think your piece of work, like we want to honor both the Western frameworks as well as Pacifica. So thank you for that, and yeah, I'll come over soon. That'll be great.
Well, or you know what, I'll come over there. So we'll meet in the middle. We'll meet in the middle.
The wonderful thing, Kennedy, about the psychological safety framework is it is about people being able to feel safe to share and the rest of us being curious enough to ask. So understanding cultural differences means about being open and asking those questions, and then the person feeling comfortable to be able to share. And that's what creates this greater understanding and then strengthens the team. Because once you have an understanding of why it's different in different cultures, it does explain a lot, and it removes those frustrations that we might have had because we've made assumptions based on our own experiences. And that's what I really love about, psychological safety, is that it actually creates an environment where people feel that they can share, and an environment where you can be curious and ask questions and learn more about other people's experiences.
Thanks, Sharon. I see.
Sorry, if I could just add there,
Yeah.
I spent 10 years in PNG, and the bias I had was that it was 100 years of cultural disrespect from white people of the national people, and I had to overcome that bias by the national people, because they had been treated so badly over a long period of time that I was just not trusted. So there's a mindset. I talked about the corporate village and the village, and that if I was to go to their village, I would be a fish out of water. And so what we're asking people to do is behave in a particularly different way that they would behave in their village. And that village is only 20 minutes bus ride. And so it's a real shift for anyone in Australia who is dealing with Melanesian, Polynesian, Southeast Asian cultures. You actually have to take a step back and take their approach to problem solving, which is not a quick answer. It's not a quick fix. You go around in circles, and it frustrates the hell out of us because we want to answer straight away. So it's just that it's taking a different perspective from your point of view. And we always talk about slow down to speed up. Well, guess what? That's what happens when you work in that environment. You're forced into taking measured steps.
Yeah, and no less thoughtful, no less effective. In fact, in many cases, more thoughtful, more effective. Yeah, I could listen. I think we should do a webinar just on that, Sharon. There's there's a couple of hours with it. Anyway,
we do have sorry, Alex.
So I thought I saw Deanne put her hand up, but no. Okay, good. All right, just
we've sadly we've come to the end of our session. We've always happens, we're running out of time. So I just wanted to let people know that in terms of next steps, so I should have mentioned earlier, but this recording, this webinar has been recorded, and I'll be sending out the recording to anyone who wants to revisit any of the points of the discussion that was held today. It will also have my contact details. So if you've got any questions, or you just want to have a conversation about what's happening in your workplace and what some of your concerns are and psychological safety, then please reach out. We have another webinar. So this is going to be a series, and our next webinar in the series will be held on Wednesday, the 12th of July, and it will be centered around employee retention. We briefly touched on that today, but why psychological safety is important in employee retention. So invites for that will go out shortly, and will also be advertised on LinkedIn. So we hope to see you on that one. And if you've got any questions or would like to stick around, Alex and I both have a couple of minutes at the end here, and feel free to hang back. Otherwise, for everyone else, thank you for your time today, and I hope you all have a wonderful week.
real pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Alex. Special thank you to Alex for joining us all the way from Canada. And you will be back here later in the year face-to-face. So we'll be running a face-to-face event up here in Brisbane, but also in Melbourne and Sydney. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
All right. Look forward to seeing you all then.